You'd have to say more. I
March
wouldn't claim
March
that
29, 2021, vaccinated people do not carry the virus. Vaccinated people don't get sick. We got that information from clinical trials, but also real-world data. It seems to me there are a number of statements you make in there that aren't accurate. Do vaccinated people carry the virus?
In March of 2021, the vast majority of data demonstrated that the vast majority of people were not getting infected if they were vaccinated.
That's not what you said. You didn't say the vast majority of people. You said vaccinated people do not carry the virus. Was that accurate?
It was generally accurate.
Generally accurate. Why not just be accurate? Why not just tell the American people the truth? Why don't you say to the American people just what you said to me? We're big boys and girls. We pay your salary. The government is supposed to be of the people, by the people, for the people. Why not just tell us the truth?
I was speaking...
Was 6 weeks later when you said if you were to get infected during post-vaccination, you can't give it to anyone else. Was that accurate?
What was the date of that?
May 19, 2021.
At the time, we had the Wuhan strain and then the alpha strain. That was the alpha strain that was circulating. That was generally true, yeah.
Generally true again? Why not again? Why not tell the American people this is generally true?
I couldn't tell you the exact data on the vaccine effectiveness of symptomatic disease and severe disease at the time. What I can tell you is that we generally saw that if you were to get infected after you had been vaccinated, that you were not carrying the virus by transmitting it to somebody else. You could not transmit it to others.
But we know that's not accurate.
It was at the time. Now, what
Really?
happened? Yes, in
Really?
May of 2021. That was true
Really?
for the alpha variant. What happened?
Let me ask you about all the general statements that were made to the American people. Not general statements, the way you guys said it. You said, was it our tax dollars? Were our tax dollars used in the lab in China?
That is something that you would have to speak to NIH about.
Our tax dollars were used. It sure looks like it was gain-of-function research. It sure looks like it actually came from the lab, and we've had several agencies, federal agencies, say that's in fact where the virus originated. The Biden administration told us that the vaccinated couldn't get it. We know that's not accurate. The Biden administration told us the vaccinated couldn't transmit it. They told us masks worked, and they told us there was no such thing as natural immunity. That seems to me to be, 7 different statements that turned out not to be true that we got from this administration. Again, why not just tell the American people the truth?
So I would dispute some of what you just said. In October 2021, CDC released a scientific brief highlighting all of the science that was out there on infection-induced immunity. And I don't know the long list I don't remember all the long lists, but there are numerous areas where we have provided science and the science review to provide data to the American people as soon as we had it.
I actually think what happened is you actually tried to be honest with the American people, and the Biden administration shot you down. You remember when you said this in February? This is before you made these statements, which I think are not being square with the American people. You said vaccination of teachers is not a prerequisite for safely reopening schools. Did you make that statement?
Something to that effect. I can't exactly say the quote, but yeah.
Vaccinations of teachers is not a prerequisite for safely reopening schools. I think you made that statement on February 3rd. Do you stand by that statement?
At the time, yeah. We had a week later or 10 days later, we had an operational guidance that demonstrated layered mitigation strategies and that you could safely reopen.
Were you speaking as Dr. Walensky, or were you speaking as Dr. Walensky, head of the CDC?
I have said that while I've been in front of Congress and the media and press conferences, during my tenure as CDC director, I've been speaking as the CDC director.
But that's not what the White House said, right? Jen Psaki said Dr. Walensky spoke to this in her personal capacity. Do you remember that statement?
I do.
Who's right? Jen Psaki or you?
Well, I will tell you that I was speaking in my role as the CDC director.
Looks to me like what happened is in February you said, I'm going to be honest with the American people. I'm going to give it to them straight. Vaccination of teachers is not a prerequisite for safely opening schools, and the Biden administration hung you out to dry. They said, nope, she ain't talking for us. She ain't talking as the head of the CDC. She's talking as Dr. Walensky. And then a month later, you said, well, you know what? I better not be totally honest with the American people. So I'm going to say vaccinated people do not carry the virus and they don't get sick. And everyone understood, like, wow, I know someone who's been vaccinated and they've gotten sick afterwards. I think what happened is you tried to be honest and they said no. And then you said, well, I'm going to have to hedge a little bit. I'm going to have to give the American people misleading statements from the head of the CDC. You were speaking as head of the CDC in both situations, right?
I have said I've been speaking as the head of the CDC.
All the time? Yeah. Well, it'd have been nice if you'd have just been honest and straightforward with the American people every single time throughout this virus. With that, I yield back.
I have stood by my commitment to tell the American people what I know when I know it. Thank you.
I now recognize Ms. Green from Georgia for 5 minutes of questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Walensky, you're coming to the end of your tenure as the CDC director, which you started in January of 2021. And we heard you say today that the COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. But what I'd like to talk to you today about is the 1.5 million VAERS reports that also reported 35,000 deaths associated with the COVID-19 vaccine. And this has been what many Americans feel like a largely ignored issue. They feel like the CDC has completely ignored the reports. They feel like you, as the CDC director, have completely ignored their reports. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit. In 2020, it was late 2020 when Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine was approved, and COVID-19 vaccines were the second highest reported. That was over 10,000. But in 2021, when vaccines were mandated, it was a federal mandate in September 9th of 2021. Federal employees and contractors were required. 90% of the 3.5 million people employed or contracted under the federal government got at least one dose of the vaccine. Vaccine cards were widely required in Democrat-run cities all over the country, basically to become a member of society. And in 2021, COVID-19 reports skyrocketed to number one at 728,829 reports. Second was the zoster shingles vaccine at just over 14,000. That's a massive number, and the numbers kept growing and growing and growing on the VAERS report. I'd also like to talk to you about how much money the American taxpayers were forced to pay Pfizer and Moderna for vaccines. The government paid Pfizer and Moderna in 2020, 2021, and 2022. Pfizer received $15.27 billion. Moderna received $9.99 billion. And boy, did they get a return on the American taxpayers' investment. Because Pfizer, amazingly, in 2022, got a 23% increase. But in 2021, they doubled their income at a 95% increase in revenue. That's absolutely impressive, thanks to the American people. But it was Moderna's whose numbers were astounding. Moderna increased their revenue in 2020, had a 1,238% increase in revenue. In 2021, they got a 2,200% increase in revenue, thanks to the American taxpayer, where money got funded into these big pharmaceutical companies for these vaccines. It's quite impressive, though, that Pfizer worldwide went from at $190 billion right there towards the beginning of 2021 and skyrocketed at the end of 2021 to $330 billion worldwide. That's quite impressive, thanks to the American taxpayer and thanks to the CDC director, Dr. Walensky, who said that vaccines were safe and effective. I'd also like to talk to you on behalf of all the pregnant women, not people, as you call them. To quote you on August 11th, 2021, CDC encourages all pregnant people, it's women, by the way, who are thinking about becoming pregnant and those breastfeeding to get vaccinated to protect themselves from COVID-19. This has also been ignored. The amount of miscarriages and stillbirths that increased drastically due to your advice to get vaccinated. Pregnant women again, not people. And then we could go on and on about the tragic stories of myocarditis and many other things. But my question for you today, Dr. Walensky, is now that you're going to be leaving the CDC pretty soon, what job are you going to take? Are you going to be on the board of either Pfizer or Moderna? Because you've done one hell of a job at making sure that they've made a lot of money. And I yield back.
Thank you
What
for
you
that
think.
question. Maybe first I will comment that CDC is not responsible for the purchase of vaccines, so I can't speak to all of the economics that you spoke to. I do want to talk a minute about the vaccine adverse event reporting system. So that system is intended for any person who has gotten a vaccine, if they have an untoward event after that vaccine, whether or not is related to the vaccine, they report. It is intended to have an over-reporting. All of the not all, most of the vaccines that were being given, I remember we gave 676 million doses of the vaccine. Any adverse event, if you got hit by a truck after you got your vaccine, that was reported to the vaccine adverse event reporting system. We at CDC have a responsibility to comb through every single one of them, to review the medical charts and to see if they are related. It is the case that the vaccine doesn't prevent being
Ms.
hit.
Walensky, I'll
Yes.
reclaim my time. You did nothing about that and continue to push vaccines. That's what the American people care about.
We review all of the things that come into the vaccine adverse event reporting system. I'd be happy to have our staff educate your staff on the work.
I don't want my staff educated. You should educate the American people about what you've done of 1.5 million reports, because they feel like you've done nothing and continue to say safe and effective.
Maybe I will just close
Thank you,
by
Mr.
saying I don't have plans after I